and the technology itself is driving a certain amount of it. So that, that arms race is not going to come to an end anytime soon. I think your best defense is being skeptical about everything in a sense. I'm almost a radical skeptic, but I'm not. I mean, I don't doubt everything, but I doubt a hell of a lot.
So your answer, Craig, is that we can't fight this with technology. We can't figure out a way to filter what is actual news, what is fake news, what is actual information, what is disinformation. We can't fake that. I mean, sorry, we can't filter that with technology. We can't fight that with technology. We would have to basically invest in education, right?
Yeah, I mean the only thing technology can do is basically start blocking out stuff. And if it blocks out stuff, then you need to know that it's not blocking out stuff that you didn't want it to block out. And how will you know that if you never saw it in the first place?
On that
So I don't think technology is the answer for this.
on that narrow point of the only option technology has is censorship, I think that there are more nuanced tools than that. I think that there are probably more, you know, um, so for example, only showing the most, or not only showing, but featuring the most validated opinions, right? And so then it becomes about an issue of what you promote versus what you don't promote.
Validated by whom? Well,
Crowdsourced, it could be,
ooh,
you,
okay.
and then crowdsourced, and then you can pick who the crowd is, right? So you can,
How do you pick who the crowd is? How do I pick who the crowd is that I want to have stuff crowdsourced by? Because I don't want, Mark Zuckerberg being the one to pick the crowd that is
you
going to be.
topic experts, perhaps, maybe only people who work in the field in which they're commenting on. Um, again, I'm not. My proposal isn't that I have a blueprint for this. I just wanted to pose that there's more
Just
options than just censorship.
yeah. And I think Twitter is doing something like that actually, aren't they? Because Donald Trump was tweeting all these kind of like crazy things about the election, um, and I think Twitter was constantly posting stuff saying, "Well, this might not be the actual truth. You should probably fact check." I don't know. I don't remember the exact words they were using, so I'm just making up some words. But they were essentially saying, this might not be true, right? So
Mhm.
that's kind of like what you're saying, just adding at least like some sort of a warning, right? A warning.
Yeah, but in the life will find a way motif, all those guys did is a lot of them moved to another service, right? Which I forget the damn thing starts with a P or whatever that all the far right has been moving to the past month or so.
To
Uh,
what? Sorry.
I don't remember what the name of the service is because I don't pay attention, but it starts with a P, and it's one that the far conservative right, who has been saying, help, help, we're being repressed by Twitter and Facebook and whatnot. They've gone to this other service, which is dedicated to letting them spew their bullshit, as far as I can tell. So that's the thing that happens is when you put in technological constraints in one platform, they move to another platform. Okay. So does that help with the problem or not? It means that I won't see it, but it doesn't mean that other people
Well,
aren't going to.
And I think Lushane joined us. I don't know if you're having trouble with the technology, Lushane, but in any case, welcome. Sorry.
Yeah, I just got in. Thanks, John.
Oh, hi, Lushane.
Yeah, hey everyone.
we're talking about solutions to the problem of both uh, information overload as well as false information on the internet, and what what both technological solutions exist and non-technological solutions. Craig has advocated for the he described as the old school view of just education. Nothing beats critical thinking, because the technological progress is such that there will be no solution that uh, stays relevant for long.
See.
So, but you do believe that we can figure out something technologically, right, Matt?
Uh,
Possibly.
I'm not positive. I'm hopeful enough to keep experimenting.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, I agree with you. I actually agree with you both. I think, which is kind of a lame thing to say because, you know,
Why?
I'm sitting on the fence. No, but I mean, I think you make a very valid argument, Craig. I think critical thinking should really become like a very important skill for us in this new age. And on the other hand, I think that, yeah, we should try to figure out ways to moderate just or to diminish this information. I think stuff like what Twitter did to Trump, just to use an example, I imagine they're doing that to a lot of other people. You know, if you post something that seems to be dangerously inaccurate, you know, maybe you can have an algorithm that kind of catches that. And it's not like you're not going to censor that, but you're at least going to uh, give people a warning. Hey, you might want to check the source. You know,
Well,
you might
if
want to fact
somebody,
check,
yeah, if
and it might be
somebody
true
else
or not, but
fire
you
in a
might want to
theater,
fact check.
then somebody else fire in the theater, then you got to be able to do something about that. And so if they actually post something that's actually dangerous to people if they follow it, then yeah, obviously that should be countered in some manner, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean,
That's a pretty clear-cut case, though.
I posted with the election stuff. What was it? Was it last weekend or the weekend before? Was it last? Yeah, last weekend I think that we got the results,
It's
and
a
I
couple of years
posted
ago.
one of these videos on my I think it was just my regular YouTube channel or something. There was a stream or whatever, and some people saw that, and of course one person said right away, oh, those are fake news, you know, Trump didn't lose the elections, you're part of the problem because the news media reports things wrong and you're just repeating it. And I didn't do anything. I didn't even reply to the comment. I mean, I just saw it because it comes out on my email and I happened to see it. But YouTube, for like somehow I don't know how, but you know, especially, you know, this is like a very minor post. It's not like it had 100 views or something, you know, or 100,000. It was viewed by very few people, and YouTube somehow the algorithm caught it, and they posted something saying, you know, basically saying that I think they posted like an article of the Associated Press showing that Trump had lost the election. And I was very surprised because I have no idea how that happened. I didn't post the article, you know. YouTube, it kind of like it was automatic. The article just came out on the bottom of the video. The Associated Press showing how Trump had lost the election. So I don't know how that happened, but I think they're already working on some algorithms to enforce information and discourage disinformation.
Yeah, I genuinely think that I agree with you, Craig, that in your skepticism of it being a total solution, right? Like at the very least, it's going to be multiple things happening at the same time that make it better. You know, I'm not looking for perfection, but if it makes it better, it's good enough to make an effort at. But I generally lean away from the effort to censor or repress in any ways because of that backlash that you described, Craig, where they just go to a different platform, or it kind of gets spun as you're being martyred. You know, the establishment won't let the truth come out, and that just makes it really hard for the mainstream news organizations to rebuild credibility because it's just assumed at the front end that there's an agenda, and so there's a bit of a catch-22, it feels like, where you can't touch it without being accused of having malicious and unfair intent, but if you just let it run wild, the most sensational thing is what gets the most eyeballs. And so yeah, in any case, it's a tough one.
Well, news needs to be regulated to a certain extent, I think, because you can't just let newspapers even, or now it's the social media, so it's a lot harder. But you can't just let disinformation, like you said, man, like run wild, right? Because then that it becomes very dangerous when you have a lot of people believing essentially lies, and those lies are just things that are just speculation. If someone just writes a piece of news saying something that is imagine if someone had written that Trump had died, obviously that would create a panic, right? And that would be dangerous, and that would be completely false because it's not
Panic,
true.
or people would be dancing in the streets and partying, and
Maybe some people, but it would definitely create a state of confusion, commotion, and those are going to be, those are things that people are just going to create. There are people in crazy places in the world creating fake news because they get views, and they've turned into a business. I mean, I watched a documentary about this. There are people that make a lot of money. They have like these underground companies in, sometimes they're like in places that are outside of the grasp of the law, like in some Eastern European countries, like Albania and stuff like that. I saw that in a documentary by, I think it was by the BBC, and they basically just create these fake news that they propagate online, and they say like outrageous things that people believe in, and they click on it, they view it, and then they make money that way. But that's very harmful. That's kind of an extreme example, but it's harmful when people are making money out of this information, and you have to regulate it somehow.
so the way I would probably consider regulating that is, part of the problem is so much of the major media in the world is owned by a very small number of very wealthy people. And I think in a lot of ways that's the ultimate source of the problem. Media in general should be more distributed and should be more under the auspices like public media. I mean, there used to be something called the Fairness Doctrine, and that based on something called the Radio Act in the 1920s. And basically, it's that those media is supposed to serve to some degree the public interest. But in 1987, the Fairness Doctrine was repealed. I believe that would have been under President Reagan. And ever since then, you've seen the polarization, the extreme polarization that you've seen in the media, and the rich people who have bought up all the media seem to lean on one side of the political aisle substantially more than the other. So if one thinks there's a hidden agenda behind some of the stuff, one may actually be correct.
So
that assumption.
I'm not I don't have a problem with the premise that a more distributed media is better, but I'm curious what you think. If, as long as there's enough, there's the question of competition, right? And if there's a sufficient diversity of agendas, so it's not about not having an agenda. Everyone has an agenda. It's just about whether or not there's a sufficient diversity and transparency to the agenda, right? And as long as MSNBC and Fox remain competing with each other and have competing agendas, I'm curious how you see, the fact that it's, let's narrow it down to just those two, right? If only
that's perfect. We'll take those two, for example. So as long as those two are there with their competing agendas, you're going to have the extreme polarization that you keep seeing, because you'll have one group that follows one religiously and one group that follows the other religiously, and they both think the other side is crazy, in essence. And that's exactly what we see now, is we see that polarization where people think that people who do not think the same that they do are crazy. And that's got to change, right? Because we're not crazy. We're just different, and we've been led in different directions. And we've been led, let's make no mistake about that. We have been led in different directions. We have not wandered off on our own on different directions. Some of us have, maybe more than others, but we've been led.
What makes you say that? Just the led part.
The led part? Well, let's talk about some of the people who have come up with some of the conspiracy theories about the election. Where has this notion come from for them? Because I don't think they stayed up late at night and made it up on their own in many cases. I suspect they're repeating something that they've heard probably a lot. And where are they hearing that from? They're hearing it from, say, Twitter, for example, or Fox News, for example, or even more extreme organizations that are spreading this stuff. And they follow that to the exclusion of, everything else. I ignore those organizations like I'm excluding them like everything else. So I'm just as guilty as the next person of it. But that's the problem we need to solve.
So when you said led there, so the first impression I got was that that you were kind of supposing a sort of a coordinated agenda by a centralized sort of thing, right? Which is as compared to more what at least the examples you gave, which are like, we're always being led by the things we're influenced by and what we're listening to. And, if I'm listening to Twitter and Fox and the president and, all these kind of, they have overlapping interests in telling a specific story, but it's different than having, a coordinated sort of, it's a little bit more self-organizing in my mind than a sort of top-down strategy being played out.
Yeah, no, people aren't that good, and conspiracy theories are largely wrong because they assume people are a hell of a lot smarter than they actually are. In general, a lot of that's just dumb luck and dumb in general. The name of that other site, Parler, is it? And I put it in the chat. I was listening to a thing on NPR about them earlier today, and that's where the conservatives are fleeing to, I imagine, listen to Steve Bannon talk about beheading people and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I mean, at least that's not a mainstream thing, though, because there are already like lots of places for, crazy ideas to be disseminated on the internet. I mean, you even have the dark web, which is essentially just really bad stuff in one place. I've never been to the dark web, actually. I've never accessed the dark web, but I've heard that's, what that is. Have you guys ever I mean, you probably don't want you probably don't
No,
want
Mr. FBI, I have never, and I don't know what you're talking about.
I probably wouldn't know if I had or not. So.
Yeah, but let me rephrase that.
I think you would know.
Guys,
Yeah.
what's that, Lashane?
You mean
I
like
think you would know if you
talk
access
about,
it. It's
they
very.
don't talk about astronomy very much and stuff like that. Okay, I getcha.
Okay, let me rephrase that. What do you guys know about the dark web? I actually don't. Like, I'm talking about the dark web, but
versus the not to be confused with the intellectual dark web, right, which is where your good buddy Joe Rogan and stuff kind of lives.
I also don't know, honestly, a lot about that. I think that's kind of a good thing. That's my understanding, but because I don't think like Joe Rogan, I don't think he likes to be associated with the intellectual dark web because I think I heard him talk about that once, and he said that he didn't subscribe to that.
I don't know. Does he like, Sam Harris and Steven Pinker and those guys? Because those guys are sometimes associated with the intellectual dark web.
Yeah, I mean, he can say he's not a part of it, but he hosts a disproportionate number of people associated with the IDW. So,
yeah, I don't know enough to really. I think that But I think there are some misconceptions because I know some of those guys that go on his podcast every once in a while, they're pretty different from Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is actually, for a long time people thought that he was like this alt-right guy, and then he actually had to start saying, hey, I'm not, man, I'm actually on the left, I'm gonna vote for Bernie Sanders. And then he had Bernie Sanders on his podcast because people are stupid, and they
I mean, to
because
be
you think a
fair,
certain way, you think about about other things in a certain way, and that's just not him.
I mean,
We're a lot of other people.
to be fair, I think that a lot of the appeal of the dark web is, or that group is that they don't approve of falling under those kind of boxes. So like Joe Rogan does hold a lot of left-leaning policy ideas, and then he embraces a lot of right-wing rhetoric on other topics. And so like and to them that's something to be celebrated. That's what free thinking looks like. I'm trying to give a fair hearing to that. And so the same thing with Jordan Peterson, Eric Weinstein, Sam Harris. Sam Harris is a perfect example who on so many issues is left-leaning, but you get him talking about Sam Harris, but you get him talking about the issues of Muslim extremism, and he has a very different view than a lot of folks on the left. And so I'm not concerned, to be honest, with the intellectual dark web. I think it's fine. I think that the fears are overblown. Anyways, that's just my
Is
take.
there a lot of fear towards it? Because
Animosity, maybe.
I don't really know.
Like as in, it's a place where teenage boys in particular can feel cool and rebellious and still engage in intellectual activities. Kind of like they would be accused of being faux intellectuals. Like they get to throw rocks at all the glass houses without having a real curriculum to defend. Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, being YouTube educated can be a pitfall, because YouTube is not real education. You can find real education on YouTube, but you can also find a lot of, miseducation on YouTube. You can find a lot of information. You can find a lot of misinformation. You can find a lot of good stuff, a lot of bad stuff. It's it's the Wild West.
It comes full circle to the question I asked, which is like, how do you organize information in a way that reliably leads and supports critical thinking? And YouTube is in some ways like, I learn a ton off of YouTube. I do. I love the 5 minute.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that you can learn anything. I'm just saying that you can learn stuff and you can unlearn stuff.
No, I totally agree. And I'm not in a position after watching that 5 minute video to understand, where does where do the experts in that field land on the way this information was presented. I don't do my due diligence because it's shallow drinking. It's easy, and it's and that's the appeal.
So what I find that YouTube is really good for is, for example, I have this 3D printer that I need to build, and I found several videos. Let's go step by step through putting together the parts to make the 3D printer. That's the kind of thing that YouTube is invaluable for. As far as telling me what to think or how to think or things like that, hell no. That's not where I'm gonna go. I'm again gonna hit you with the old-fashioned sort of answer, and I'm gonna say, hey, books are the place to be.
I mean, books aren't any more, there's the filter that books have up until recently. Now there's self-publishing, but in general, is that they're to be a reputable publisher, you don't want to be associated with a bunch of crap, right? But fundamentally, there's no more guarantee that there's tons of crap books, is my point.
There's tons of crap everything. It's,
right.
Yeah. 80%.
So then the question becomes, what's a good heuristic? So we all know that there's just imperfect from the top to the bottom. What's what are the good shortcuts, the reliable shortcuts we can encourage people to use to think.
And what do you think they are? Give me one. To work on.
Plug from the place that pays my bills. I work at All Sides, right? And so the philosophy there is showing information from different perspectives side by side in a context of one another, so that there's never a there's a chance to avoid straw men, because you can't. It's not as easy to straw man something when you can just look right next to it and see, oh, that's not the argument they made. The argument they made is different than that, right? And so you're forced into a dialogue as opposed to accepting information in a vacuum.
So what's that exactly? All sides. Can you
go to allsides.com and take a look? It's
put that in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll check it out. But is it like a website that you go to and they show you different sides of one thing?
Can I share my screen?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
you've disabled it.
No, I think it's like you have to allow it. I think so. I gotta change the sharing options. Okay, it'll work now.
Got it. So this is All Sides. So
All Sides. Okay.
Yeah. And so there's news from the center, left, and right, and they're side by side with one another. It's kind of a basic idea fundamentally,
so
right?
Is it a news site?
Cool.
Mm-hmm. It's not just a news site. There's other resources, like, for example, there's a dictionary which describes terms in ways that point out the ways in which different ideological perspectives would view the term. There's general topics, so on any sort of, let's see, media bias, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's background reports provided, and even those background reports are graded. So these are from the center. Okay.
Well, this is a very cool site. I didn't know about this. This is very cool.
Yeah, you should publish. Let us know more about this. Publish it in the group.
Is this a startup that you created, or?
Oh no, I'm the director of dialogue here. So the president, the founder. There's a few founders, or a couple of founders, I should say. This is John Gable, and he has a TED Talk that you should check out. I work on the civil dialogue space here. Okay. I was going to bring up and the reason I don't, bring it up in chat, because it feels fairly self-serving. It's like, check out this organization
we'll do it.
I'm a part of.
Yeah.
But this is the co-founder is Lean's right. He actually got his start in politics working under McConnell.
Okay.
But they explicitly identify where everybody leans according to a bias quiz that you can take.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. I think that's really cool. That's really cool. There you were, Matt Byrne.
That's me.
I saw you quickly. Look like an awful lot of white people there.
Yeah, well, nobody's perfect.
I certainly.
But we can't always have like perfect representation. I think that's also a pitfall, for.
Well, it's impossible again. Right?
Yeah, it's impossible, and I think it should be an organic thing mostly.
Organic is good. Well, I'll go through and I'll take a look through your site.
How old is that site? Was it like a recent thing? Was it from like 10 years ago, 5 years?
It's been around, I think, since 2006.
Oh, wow.
That's really cool. Have you been working there for a while?
Not very long. This year is when I started.
Oh, cool.
And and this year is when they've totally blown up. We're now at 10 million views per month.
Nice. So why do you think this year was their big year? Is there a particular reason for that?
Well, I think these things that we're talking about were with around the trust issues in media, alongside the dying news industry, alongside fake news. I mean, there's so many different trends that I think um, draw people's interest to a solution like this one.
That's a very good point. Yeah, and I think there's a real need for something like that. So it's really cool that you actually work for that. Is that like a national thing? Like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. So I mean, maybe that's gonna become the new big thing because that seems exactly what we need. As a country and as a world.
Hmm.
All over the world. In the United States, it's particularly bad. It seems the polarization of media, but
Yeah.
uh, I think it's just probably a matter of time before that's a global phenomenon if we keep going the direction we're going.
I hope so. The part of the project that I'm leading on is so there's a ton of research that shows that information alone isn't usually enough to uh, depolarize people. It usually happens in the context of relationships, personal relationships, where you're a friend with somebody who you've built rapport with rather, and either you're working on the same project with them, you've developed respect and trust, and then and only then these topics that are very divisive come up. But because you have this sort of shared respect, you can't just throw them and everyone who holds this view um, you know out of your heart, right? Because you actually like this person, and that they're good enough to not be um yeah, like that you allow that complexity in that person, right? Without totally demonizing them and dehumanizing them. And so that allows you to start thinking about the ways in which, like, the arguments they make. And so it's relationship first, and then the arguments come, and then there's the possibility of being persuaded. And so my job is to figure out a way to make that process scalable, because the process of relationship building across differences in particular is time consuming. And it's harder and harder to do nowadays because we don't even live in the same spaces as much as we used to. We used to have these common shared spaces like in churches and civic organizations, and the whole book Bowling Alone is all about these trends and the big sort, where we're not even living near the people who we disagree with anymore. And so uh, all
Yeah,
of that
that's a good point. Yeah,
bridge building is harder right now. And so
yeah.
Kind of curious. I was just kind of curious to know what sort of tools is used to conduct this sort of research. Is it a series of surveys? If you don't mind talking about that.
So which research on which part?
Oh, the level of research required to gather this sort of information and build relations with various people across the country. Is it like a series of different types of surveys sent to different schools and then schools distribute, or is it more like a on the ground sort of thing?
Just so I understand the question, you're asking, what does the research look like about affective polarization, or the research about how we don't live and talk to each other as much anymore?
The research. Sorry, so to clarify that, the first one basically
Of
of basically how the polarization, how you know the who are how you reach out to the people who are polarized in the first place and build that relationship with them. And
so the research on how to, all like the building,
yeah.
so going from relationship building to, so there's a so there's a mix of both survey and data and psychological research. A great resource that I would start with is The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. I think that's kind of become a sort of foundational body of research for social psychologists who talk about tribalism and how we think and act tribally. He makes the case that we have these moral taste buds, and that liberals and conservatives reliably both self-identify and can be verified through testing differently along those taste buds. So, for example, conservatives will have a higher sensitivity towards questions of sanctity, for example, whereas liberals tend to have a higher sensitivity towards something like care, which is like taking care of the downtrodden, and things like that. And so the question, so the way that I can't give you all the ways that he studied that, but
yeah, it's fine.
yeah, but it was a mixture of both experimental research and survey data.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yeah. But Righteous Mind, I can't recommend that book highly enough. That is a phenomenal resource.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna try to look it up. Yeah, I mean, the thing that,
in case you wanted to skip all the reading.
what's that?
I said there's also a TED Talk in case you want to skip all the reading.
Yeah, I mean, that's also good. I haven't watched a TED Talk in a while, but that's certainly easier than reading a book. I mean, it's faster.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the you know, like the relationship, it's really interesting what you said about the relationships and how, I mean, maybe, yeah, that's an important component. You know, you build a relationship and then that way you can have a real dialogue with someone. Because if not, at this point, and I do think that now with Biden getting elected, maybe things will change a little bit. I don't know if they're going to change substantially, but maybe we'll, you know, things will calm down a little bit more after a while, become less polarized. It's a possibility. But in any case, it's still going to be pretty polarized for quite some time. Even, you know, during the Obama years, I mean, there was a lot of polarization. So I think we need to figure out ways to become less polarized and actually having real dialogue. And you're absolutely right. You know, having relationships first and then actually talking about things in a way that you're kind of open-minded to some extent. Maybe that's not even something that helps. Maybe that's really, as people, you know, maybe we need that. Maybe we need that basis to actually have an open mind, to actually have a conversation. If not, we're just pretending. And some people more than others, you know, I try to have an open mind because I'm kind of the thinking type, you know. Not every, you know, other people have other types, right? And they do things differently. Some people don't really want to be open-minded. They like just having one opinion. But for everybody, I think having a relationship is something that allows you to establish a dialogue with someone, regardless of your starting point. So I think you're absolutely right.
The one thing I'm kind of concerned about is I don't disagree with anything you said, Bruno, or I don't really disagree with anything anyone has said so far. But the one thing I'm kind of concerned about is I'm not convinced that what you just said in terms of, you know, having a dialogue and, you know, communication and all that stuff, I don't think that's scalable when it comes to a massive country like the US. Because you come to think of it from a historic perspective, you know, there has always been an uncomfortable amount of polarization. And at some point, when, you know, if you have a large enough population, you're going to have division. I think that's an interesting point of psychology there to look into. I can't really think of a source that talked about this.
It is an interesting question, Lashane. Is it scalable or is it not scalable? And that's a big question for the 21st century.
Yeah.
I agree, and it is the problem that, like I said before, I'm focused on kind of experimenting around. And one response I've heard, and this doesn't resonate well with my temperament, because I tend to want more top-down solutions, more like technologically scalable or business scalable, something along that. But one response that a guy in the field named John Wood Jr., who works at Braver Angels, argued is, that is what actually scales are norms. And so what you do is you develop norms at the institutional level, and that's where it can scale. But you don't look for an app solution, right? Because that's not going to be incentive. The incentives aren't going to be sufficient. But if you focus really hard on developing a norm that gets turned into habit forming sort of solutions, that's where there's hope for kind of a more grassroots, slow change. And like I said, this isn't something that appeals to me a great deal, because I want to be able to demonstrate that I've been successful, right? And the theory of change that he's supporting is something that I can't test for a decade. So anyways.
Well, I think that when you're talking about a select group of people, and this is certainly not the answer to the question, but it's just one area in which you could implement some sort of change. I think in politics, for example, which is what I want to talk about, we could build relationships in a much more effective way. You know, if it became the norm for people in Congress and Senate, you know, in local government, to actually to have, you know, social connections between them, you know, not just between Democrats and Republicans, but actually everybody basically hang out together. And if that was seen as, you know, if that was encouraged, you know, yeah, they should establish personal relationships, these Democrats, these Republicans, they should become friends basically. And I think that would be a start for them to be able to work together and kind of like set the tone. I don't know if this would change the population in general, but I do think, especially in our day and age, you know, with media, with all these news media covering politics all the time, whatever happens with politics kind of like sets the tone. It seems that it's setting the tone for people to become really polarized and hate the other side. And if they gave the example, you know, okay, we're gonna be friends, or at least we're gonna hang out together, we're gonna see each other as people, and then we're gonna talk about things and try to compromise. I think that
So
could be a start. I don't know.
there are 2 points about that kind of concern me. One of them is if they actually did that and became good buddies within the Congress or whatever governmental agency you're talking about, how would any new ideas ever break in? Because one of the things that you find is that if there's an in crowd like that, bringing stuff in from outside of the in crowd becomes extremely difficult over time. The other thing that I'd be far more interested in is I think they should become buddies with the people that they are supposed to be representing. What you find is that there is not necessarily, I mean, some do a really good job at it, but many do very poor jobs of communicating with their so-called constituency. And that concerns me a lot because those people are put in to represent us. And I am not necessarily convinced that that's what they actually do.
Well, I mean, regarding the second thing, the second point, I think, you know, it's a different question. It's a different question, and I agree with you. I agree with you. That's another issue that certainly could be improved for a problem. But again, that's a different problem. It's like that problem that you're talking about. I think it's a different problem. It's also a big problem today. Is representative democracy is not really working all that well anymore, because there is a big disconnect between those that are being represented and those that represent them. So that's certainly something that breach needs to, that gap needs to be breached.
And
The first point, I think I agree with you. That's kind of a problem. But on the other hand, it's not up to them. Even if they have good social relationships, it's not up to them to say who's in or who's out, because people vote them in or vote them out. So yeah, I mean, I think you have a point, but at the same time, I don't know if that would be a huge problem, because you can't get voted out and you can get voted in, and that doesn't depend, you know,
I think if you were to talk to, say, Allison and ask her about what she thinks about the Old Boys Network, I think you would get a completely different point of view than maybe the one that you're holding here at the
maybe
moment. I think
maybe Allison will jump in.
very entrenched hierarchies in there, and getting through entrenched hierarchies takes, for one thing, like Matt said, it takes 10 years. No, it probably takes several generations in some cases to get through these entrenched hierarchies. And so anything that you see in terms of change is going to be appear glacially slow. That doesn't mean that it's not happening, but one has to appreciate the fact that it isn't going to happen. The only way it's going to happen quickly is through bloody revolution. And I don't think at the moment any of us is pushing in that direction. Although I admit I've had my thoughts over the past 4 years, but this stuff takes time to whittle through, and I don't think entrenching it is, which is why, in fact, I'm a big term limit guy, even though I know many of my close friends are not. I'm a huge term limit guy.
What's that term limit guy?
Term limits for Congress.
Oh, okay.
Particularly the Senate.
Well, right now there are no term limits.
Correct, only for the presidency.
Only for the presidency. Okay.
Even for the Supreme, I would not mind seeing Supreme Court term limits involved too.
And I think Supreme Court, it would be interesting. It would be interesting for them to get voted in and voted out as well. I think it would definitely make things more democratic, because at the moment the system is not really working with the Supreme Court, because they're supposed to be impartial and they're not anymore.
Well, the system
is a huge problem, which is a
isn't
problem for the
working
court.
because of Mitch McConnell. Is why the Supreme Court isn't working, because he pretty much stonewalled attempts to balance it and fast-tracked attempts to put it in his favor. So yeah, I think we can tell where the problem with the Supreme Court is coming from.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you're probably right, but there is a problem, and I think, yeah, maybe making it democratically elected, I think that would maybe it would generate other problems, but I think certainly it wouldn't make it more partial, because it's already so partial. So
Yeah,
that's,
I mean, I don't think
that would be one of the
popularity
drawbacks
contest,
at
but
first glance, but that's not even an issue at this point.
I always kind of, in these conversations, specifically around democratic reforms, I wonder how often people are authentically weighing trade-offs as opposed to thinking there's, like where the assumption is the system isn't working because what I prefer isn't happening, right? Which isn't the same thing at all. As far as I can tell, democratic legitimacy is really to the degree to which you ought to accept results that don't go your way. And so, the Supreme Court one is tricky, because at some level, the thing that I dislike is that it seems so arbitrary, because when a Supreme Court justice dies, makes a huge difference because the terms are so long, and so you can just get unlucky, which is basically what Democrats have been. You shift the timeline 3 months in two different circumstances, and there's a 7-2 left to right lean, right? And so it feels arbitrary in that way.
Yeah,
but I'm really hesitant.
Garland thinks it's arbitrary.
What's that?
I bet Merrick Garland thinks it's arbitrary.
Yeah. Well, and frankly, I'm not surprised by that choice. To put like the other hat on, in a million years, can you imagine the left ever asking their representatives to do anything different if they believed that abortion rights were on the table? That they wouldn't be willing to pull every legislative trick in the book to protect this seemingly, one of the most important rights in their mind. I do not believe the scrupulosity of the right are different than the left when it comes to democratic decision making in that way.
Just to clarify, when I said it wasn't working, I think the problem is bigger than the fact that the Republicans control the court. I mean, that's not really what I referred to. I understand that you thought that, but that wasn't what I meant at all. What I meant was the Supreme Court is only when it makes like political decisions, and even any kinds of decisions, really, it only works if the court is impartial. That's why the law needs to be impartial, right? If
But
the law is
my
not,
challenge to you on that is you need to prove that it was not impartial, as opposed to just you disagreed with their choice, right? Like,
I think we would have to go over like specific cases in
right.
order to actually do that. So I don't think we can do that now. I mean, without some research, but I think this is the impression that I get is that there's definitely a bias. Like judges are being elected in basis of their bias. Basically, oh, you're a right leaning judge or a right wing judge. Okay, we're gonna get you in there because of that. Or
Yeah,
the same for the left, right?
remember
That's a big bias to start with,
you know,
and that's not really conducive to the law being partial.
Well, I think there's a
remember
difference
one thing,
between
though, Bruno, is that federal judges are not elected. Federal judges are appointed.
right.
Mhm.
But what I was going to say is there a difference in your mind between bias and having an ideological framework in which you work, in which you make legal decisions? Because there are multiple ideological frameworks to make legal decisions, and there are differences. And so when a strict constructionist gets on the court, I don't know if it's fair to say, oh, they're being biased, as if somehow there's ever such a thing as a bird's eye view on legal decision making, as a view from nowhere in which to make legal decisions. I don't believe that exists. I think you're forced to use a framework to make the decisions. And what I'm hearing is that you just don't like the ideological framework that is being used to make decisions by the majority on the court.
No, not really. I mean, yes, that's kind of true that like I'm more left leaning than right leaning, but that's not really the issue that I have with it. The issue that I have with it is I think that the law should be impartial. And yes, I understand that you can't be 100% impartial because nobody can, not even judges, but you should definitely make an attempt. I mean, if you're not being like that is the very foundation of law, is being impartial. And the Supreme Court is a little bit different. It's a little bit different because yes, eventually they're gonna, well, not eventually, but in some cases they're gonna have to make some decisions that are political in nature. That's fine, but the only way that the Supreme Court and the law in general works in the sense that it supports the democracy long term is if it's kind of above, this partisanship, right and
Yeah.
left. I'm not saying the left is right. I'm not saying the right is right. The most important thing is actually the law. In the republic, and the law. I mean, it has to be upheld in an impartial manner.
Yeah, and the only thing
it
I'm
only
pushing on is
works if that happens.
I don't think there's such a thing. I
Well,
think that what you're calling impartial is in fact in its own ideological framework.
No, I mean we disagree. Then we disagree because I certainly think there is a way to make it impartial, and that's the only way it works really. If
And
you're
I'll
going,
give you
if you're
a good
going about
example.
it, from the start with a right wing mentality or a left wing mentality, I don't think that's the right way to go about it.
I'll give you a good example, and that would be John Roberts, right? The current Chief Justice. He's obviously of conservative bent, but yet he has looked at and adjudicated a lot of issues in what seems to be a very impartial manner based upon interpretation of precedent, of legal precedent. And that is what the Supreme Court's job largely is to say, either we got this precedent and according to that, we need to rule that way, or we need to make a new precedent, or we ultimately need to say the previous precedent was wrong and we need to change it. Right? Those are the three things the Supreme Court does.
I agree.
Especially in common law, you should be able to follow the precedent. You know, it doesn't matter if the precedent is Republican when you're a Democrat, or if the precedent is Democrat when you're a Republican. That shouldn't be really as big an issue as it is.
But again, I think you were right when you said we need to get into the specifics, because what my sense is you look at evidence of consistency of being on the majority or the dissenting opinion as evidence of bias, as opposed to evidence of consistency within a framework for making legal decisions. And so this question of precedent, like I don't think you're actually ducking. I'm sorry. I think you are ducking the question of whether or not following precedents isn't enough guidance to determine one way or another on a lot of these issues. There's just basically a willingness of whether or not you think you need to stay more narrowly constructed or more broadly and expansively understood, right? And that's something you can be consistent with. And just because you're consistent with that doesn't mean that you're, making the decision politically, for example, right? Like so there's a bunch of right-wing justices that, they allowed Obamacare to basically remain mostly intact, right? Like if they were purely political, they would have struck down the whole thing, and it would have been done, and it would have been relatively easy to do with a 6-3. So anyways, I think it's different than just impartial or biased. Yeah.
I think you have, maybe I'm not really sure what you're saying exactly, but if I understood right what you said right now, I think what you're saying is that, yeah, maybe they are biased towards one side, but they are still capable of being essentially impartial, or, making a decision that favors the other side when it's necessary, when following the law means that. In that case, yeah, that's a good point you're making, and hopefully, if that's still the case, I don't disagree with you. As long as they are able to make those decisions in the way that they should be made, following the law, following the precedent, it's just good practice of the law, right? So, and that's how it really needs to be if it is to work. When you have judges that are biased from the beginning, that's the only thing I'm saying. It doesn't really matter if it's the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is more influential, so it does matter more. But also, in a local court, it's still not good if you have a judge that is biased, and it's not good for the law, and the law doesn't really mean much if the judge is not going to follow the law, if he's not going to follow the precedent, right? That's the only point I'm making. And hopefully they will be able to continue to do things in the right way. It's just a little bit concerning when the whole strategy behind appointments is, instead of being a compromise to find someone who is the best person for the job, the whole strategy is, let's make sure we do the timing right, we get the consensus at the right time for the right person to actually be more in favor of our side and not the other side, which seems to me kind of like the motive, the rationale behind the whole appointment process.
That's
I'm sorry, Craig?
The thing that really annoys me the most is that we have let so much power be concentrated into the hands of a single individual who is only elected by one state out of 50. And that concerns me greatly. And it means that the structure of the Senate is not, I think, is letting us down.
You don't think there's enough checks and balances to prevent this one single person from doing something outrageous?
Nope, because it's
really
been done for the past 5 or 6 years at least, right, by the Senate Majority Leader, who has basically taken upon himself damn near king-like powers. And if I wanted to have royalty, I'd be singing God Save the Queen, because she'd be by far my preferred monarch in this realm.
Allison was like hearing all this law talk, and she was like, I gotta get in there. I gotta tell them what I think.
I would love to be contradicted by Allison on this point, because we were talking about whether or not the Supreme Court has shifted from impartiality to becoming more biased. And I was arguing that I don't think that's the right framework to understand what's happened. And I don't believe in impartiality. I believe that there's legal frameworks which there are differences of camps on, and being consistent about a strict constructionist understanding of the law is not a bias. It's you're forced to use a framework to make your legal decisions. And I don't think that's evidence of being of bias in the same way that, personal bias or political bias is a totally different thing.
I tend to agree with the fact that we do work from a framework when we look at, constitutional law and, stare decisis, when we look at deciding particular, contentious matters, the Supreme Court will look at precedents. It's not necessarily going to be, political in its nature. A lot of the dissents that we're seeing nowadays, may have to do with, somewhat of a political change. I mean, there's a lot of question about stare decisis. How much do we rely on precedent, especially when we think about a legal framework or a constitution that has been, it was drafted a long time ago. It's very difficult to amend the Constitution. So we're working from a framework where a document that was written many years ago has been interpreted over time through case law. And that case law has, made some incremental changes. And sometimes the question is, has it gone, far enough in terms of those changes? But I do think that unlike Congress or things that have maybe more opportunities for political kind of corruption, I do believe that the Supreme Court is somewhat insulated in terms of political influence. Not to say that, like, for example, Ginsburg has, was known, she was known a little bit to take certain interpretations, depending on the overall kind of lineup thereof. I mean, you can kind of see, I feel like there's a good website out there that has, like, each individual Supreme Court justice and where they fall in terms of their interpretation camp. And Ginsburg has definitely moved, and her philosophy a little bit was like, I believe in a balanced Supreme Court. And so, if it became a little bit more traditionalist, she would maybe, shift a little bit more kind of in terms of liberal readings and things like that. But it's definitely not a political reading of things. My personal opinion. So
your connection sucks.
The big issues I think that we're going to be seeing in the next couple of years, including abortion and things like that, based on. Oh, it does.
Yeah. There's a pretty big lag. Sorry, I'm only making out like maybe other people have a better.
No, her connection is not.
Let me reconnect.
Yeah.
You never know when it's time to interrupt and be like, no, this connection isn't getting any better.
Yeah, no, it wasn't great.
We need to be able to understand what people are saying. So
yeah, I mean, it has to be pretty good in order to have a good conversation for the most part. Yeah, I don't know. I think that so the point is, yeah, I understand what you're saying, Matt. And I mean, it's an interesting point of view. It's certainly not a point of view that I share. I do think I see, I see the law, I think the law only works when there is a very a high degree of impartiality, because and that's kind of the value of the Supreme Court, in my opinion. You know, the basically the Supreme Court in any country, in the United States or any democracy, the reason why, you know, every democracy has instituted some form of Supreme Court is basically to, if they can agree, if you have two sides or more sides, in terms of a lot of countries have more than two sides, but if basically you have these political factions, which is what they are, you have these political factions that can't agree on something that is like a fundamental part of government, you know, let's say, oh, is that president, just to give an example, hypothetical, so that happened in the election, or I mean, I'm getting very specific. So, but basically, if they disagree about something that is very fundamental, let's just give this example. So, okay, so that that election process was fair or was not fair, and then you have two factions or more factions saying different things. They need basically someone impartial to say, okay, now we need to look not at what the right prefers or the left prefers or the center prefers or the extreme right prefers. We need to look at what the law says. We need to look at what the rules say, and we need to judge this in an impartial manner. And that's just one example. But in every single decision that you ask a court to make, you're basically asking the court to make a decision based on what the law says. You know, they're not supposed to, you know, make the law or change things up, but they need to at least, you know, they need to read what's already in place. If not, if that's the validity of rules, right? We need to play by the rules. That's a democracy can only work if people play by the rules.
Bruno's hot take: follow the rules. It's democracy.
Better in terms of my connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to be better. Well, because the democracies are very fragile. You know, the only way democracies work is if people follow the democratic rules. When they don't do that anymore, because it's all a big construct. When people stop following those rules that they commonly agreed upon, then it becomes a power grab, and then it's not a democracy anymore.
I think you should probably emphasize the fact that rules should be flexible, because at some point, you know, archaic things should be considered and possibly reconsidered and possibly renewed.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to fall into certain dogmas as truth 100 years down the road or something like that.
I enjoy thinking about like what democracy 3.0 is going to be. You know, like it's definitely going to be much more digital, much more, I hope, transparent, more accountability on narrow aspects of the work that legislators do. I think that it's crazy to me that it feels like the fundamental routines and rituals and way the work is done hasn't changed since, I don't know, mid 1800s in terms of you know what I mean? Like if you got to redesign democracy from the ground up using all the new tools we have, like how different would it look?
I mean, here's an interesting thing. So Switzerland in 1999 decided to overturn its current constitution and draft something completely new. I mean, because it's 1999 and, you know, we're coming into the 2000s, you know, we have to be prepared for, you know, a new era.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the problem is you have people treating the Constitution in this country as though it's a religious text, to be honest. Like we place so much emphasis on it. And like, by the way, am I cutting in and out?
No, you're good.
No, not yet.
No.
Okay, I fixed my internet.
I'm glad Matt said what we were all thinking.
All better now.
No, I appreciate that. You should just interrupt people right away because it is so annoying when it's, you know, cutting in. It's hard to really listen. But I mean, Switzerland, written in their constitution, is like 30% of their energy sources are going to be, you know, from Switzerland and things that are renewable energy sources. But you don't hear people in Switzerland saying, this is my constitutional right. I mean, the way the Constitution is treated is much different than people. I mean, it's almost like the Constitution rights were given to them by like these gods of democracy or something like that. And it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. And having said all that, and I agree with every single word, I think there's a tendency, particularly on the left, I would say, to underestimate the value of norms, and the unintended consequences of just kind of pulling levers that seem like they're detached from other things. As in, there's a virtue for having a slow moving legal body, that is underappreciated on the left, I would argue.
Can
What
you
do
be
you
a
mean by
little more
slow-moving
specific?
legal?
As in, anytime you get a slim majority for a fad, enacting it, that has major consequences, I think the benefit of the filibuster, which obviously it's as frustrating for everyone when they're on the losing end of it, but the benefit of a filibuster is you would need to have at least a 60-40, on what basically, if an idea is good enough to get 60-40, you're fairly confident that it's a good enough idea. But a slim majority can strike kind of prematurely. And then basically you because laws take such a long time to implement and to track and to evaluate, you don't know if it's a good idea until much later. And if a slim majority is constantly bouncing back and forth between parties and they're constantly undoing what the other one just did, it's a very dysfunctional way of legislating.
Ellison, since you got cut off last time, do you want to kind of repeat what's your take on? So can we talk about an impartial law, like basically what I believe in, or do you fall more into the Matt's camp that it's okay to be biased, it's okay to be or to have a certain framework that is either on one side or the other to start with? What's your take on that?
Sure, I'll give an abridged kind of version of what I was going on about before. But to kind of go back to, the legal process being a little bit slow, I think it has some advantages, but it also has some disadvantages. I'm in technology law, so I think just to kind of, it depends on really what you're working with, because maybe things aren't moving fast enough considering the landscape of certain elements. But to go back to what I said earlier, I think the question was whether or not the Supreme Court, Supreme Court justices in particular, their political leanings necessarily influence the creation of law, right? Because common law and decisions from the Supreme Court become law. So we have obviously, our legislative branch creating laws, and most of the time constitutional concerns strike down laws that because they're unconstitutional. That's, something that's what's happening in most kind of cases. That being said, I do think, like I said, there's stare decisis, this idea that you look to, precedent. It's a document that we're looking at, the Constitution, written many, many years ago, that has been interpreted through common law and amendments, which are very difficult to kind of, pass in terms of the Constitution. But I mean, incremental changes, most of the interpretation is creating almost new constitutional rights or implied constitutional rights. These penumbra of rights, for example, which people are, it's not verbatim in the text, but we've read it into the Constitution. It's been interpreted. And as, through common law, we have these incremental kind of tweaking and more kind of interpretations of the law. And, we really won't deviate from that interpretation unless, there's some sort of kind of 4-step standard, which I'm not going to go into right now, but to change those types of things. And lucky for you all, I'll be studying the California bar coming up, so I'll have a fresh new insight to all the things that I learned in law school. But essentially, you're getting into cases that, like for example, the abortion case, situation, which I think will probably be addressed in the next coming years, will probably be more to do with less of a political leaning and more of a scientific change. We really haven't addressed Casey. People know Roe, but actually Casey is more of the pinnacle case when it comes down kind of the primary case when we look at abortion. I know we've talked about this kind of offline, but you know, we'll be looking at that current standard underneath the common law and not looking at a political belief stance that you would see with, you know, red versus blue kind of types of discussion that you would see on the legislative lawmaking side. We're talking about what is the constitutional right and when does someone, you know, become essentially a person, and that's, you know, a legal standard that isn't decided by individuals in the, you know, in a democracy, but it's actually something that's been inferred by the Supreme Court, a small group of people over time that have a certain level of, you know, analytical reasoning, ability to look at cases and make decisions. And it's a group of 9 individuals. And of course, we see dissents. And what we're seeing more often than not are in the dissents are things that are essentially a little bit more political, maybe climates. Because at the end of the day, if there's a particular culture that's prevalent in society, it's hard to ignore that when you're looking at a document that's so old, when a culture, and we think about, you know, the gay marriage questions where, you know, back in the day, actually, and you know, back in the day, it was illegal in some states and many states to get married to someone who was a different race as you. And, you know, the world has changed, right? Back in the day, if you were a woman, if you were Black, you were not considered a person underneath the Constitution. So as times change, you know, things change, and, you know, reading interpretation differences, there are incremental changes. And so I think Ginsburg always said, you know, do not look to the weather of the day, but the climate of the era. And I think that is something that you can look at and track through, you know, common law, but it's not a perfect system. I mean, we're interpreting things within a constitutional document that have changed quite a bit. I mean, in some sense, would we be better off with a brand new constitution? Maybe. But I know I said I was going to give you an abridged version.
I was just going to make fun of you for that. I was like, I think the abridged version might have been longer than the original version.
I think it was quite a bit longer. Yeah.
All of it appreciated. By the way, you kind of buried a lead in there. Does that mean you are officially moving to California?
So during the summer, probably. So right now and for the next foreseeable future, I'll be kind of studying from Minnesota. But
So you think you're gonna move to California? Is that the plan now?
I did take a job with a Silicon Valley tech firm. So
Congratulations.
Congrats.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Congrats.
So your new job is with a California company?
it is.
Okay. How do you like it?
Hard to tell. I just quit my job on Friday, and it's all coming pretty quickly, right?
Is that the one that you said you had that interview with? Because you talked about that interview. You asked Shobek, you know, what do you think about that? Didn't you?
Maybe. I've had a series of interviews over the last couple weeks.
Yeah. I think so. I think the guy that asked you, how would you rate yourself, you know, from 1 to 10 in this?
Oh, that's right. No, I that was a different job actually.
Okay.
I had a couple of things kind of going on that I had to kind of pick and choose from, but I decided to work for a firm. It's going to be tech transactions. You know, it's Silicon Valley. Who knows what Silicon Valley will be, you know, in the foreseeable future? Because right now, you know, it's the tech startup of the world. So, you know, obviously be working with some established companies, but also some technology startups. But who knows if Silicon Valley will be the center of tech in the future.
Are you going to be working with one of those big companies or a startup?
So this is a law firm. So we're going to have many clients. Obviously, a good chunk of them are established in the tech industry, and then some are, you know, a handful of them are going to be, you know, some new startups looking for, you know, SaaS agreements, licensing.
Oh, so it's a law firm in California that specializes in tech.
Yes. So I'm making the jump from working in-house to working for a firm. So that's why I need to study for that California bar.
So, but for now, are you going to work remotely?
Yeah.
Okay. That's cool. Well, that's exciting. Well, congratulations, Ellison. That's
Yeah, very much so.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Like I said, I am going to be studying back to law school I'm taking the exam coming up in the next couple months, and so I have to get my head back in the game. So one of those topics will be constitutional law. So when you ask me things, like I said, I'm not a criminal lawyer, so I think sometimes we talk about criminal law and I can talk about it high level, but it's been, several years since I've been in law school, and I'm like, I can't remember the elements at this point.
Yeah, for sure. Do you only do tech law now?
So I do like corporate law, so kind of startup stuff, entity formation, those types of things, but kind of business, corporate, IP, intellectual property stuff, contracts.
Okay. All right. So I still don't really know where you stand on the impartiality of the law, Ellison, to be honest with you.
He needs the non-abridged version, I guess.
We need the non-abridged
He
version.
needs more
perhaps.
words.
I think I only opined on the Supreme Court, and I think they're insulated from political types of questions. Actually, I mean, that is an issue. They don't really address what they call political issues or political questions. And
Hey, Bruno, Shashir says he's in the waiting room. Sorry.
so that's my view, is that they're more protected from those types of questions. And so impartiality, can anyone really be impartial? But I think they're not subject to potential corruption like Congress and things like, our lawmakers maybe are.
Do you
exposed
think
to.
okay, so I still don't quite know your answer, but
Bruno, could you clarify your question then? Maybe, or ask it again, perhaps.
yeah. In any case, welcome, Sashir.
Hey.
Can you hear us and talk? And is everything
Yep.
working? Okay, awesome.
I can hear you. I
Awesome.
just commented that Craig is in space.
Okay, well let's launch a more general question then.
Craig, are you wearing a black turtleneck? Are you in a Carl Sagan outfit?
It's just a black T-shirt that actually is my black T-shirt with my bandana full of heavy caliber bullets on it.
Nice. It's like
Yeah.
hard rock, man.
Should have done the turtleneck. Could be Carl Sagan.
It'd be too warm.
Yeah.
like-
So
30 degrees.
I was gonna ask. So should the law be impartial, and should judges be impartial?
But aren't they?
Allow me to. I want to amend that question, because I think you're going to get a resounding yes. Like, impartiality is in theory good. I think the more interesting question is something like, is it possible? Is kind of one, and then number two is like, practically speaking, assuming it's not perfectly possible, you kind of aim at it, but you still need some sort of, you need a lens in which to even evaluate the information. Like, there's no such thing as a value-free way of taking in the information. There's going to be a filter, going to be a hierarchy of,
So
God, Allison's probably having some Jordan Peterson heckles in the back of popping up now, but
that's a great point, Matt, and I like that. And I think that's kind of what. So my next question. Okay, so we can continue to advance the question. You're talking about, yeah, it's not possible just to be impartial. You need to have your framework. But so next question, what does that framework entail? Like, when we're talking about that framework, so you seem to think it's okay to have this conservative framework or this liberal framework. I'm not so sure that's okay. Like, what do you think that framework entails? What do you mean by a framework?
I mean, so the first thing I would say is it's not just okay, it's necessary. So that would be that's the distinction.
Why is it okay? So why is it necessary? What makes it necessary?
because what you call impartial is just a non-explicit values framework. Like you're just assuming that it's obvious how it should be done, that it's not value laden in the first place, right? So whether or not a law should be, like, how strictly you should try to interpret the intentions of the writers of that law versus trying to adapt it to the current culture is a value choice. There are pros and cons to each of them. Like there are trade-offs. It's not a absolutely obvious moral choice to me. So to give merit to a strict constructionist, you don't want not elected people changing laws, generally speaking, as much as possible. On the other hand, laws are really hard to change, and it's pretty clear that the framers couldn't possibly have anticipated the current context when they were writing the laws they were writing. And so that's a trade-off. And so my point is just that you have to acknowledge that it's in a trade-off relationship, that there isn't an absolute impartial place you can stand where you're not making that trade-off relevant. Does that make sense?
Are you arguing constructionism or originalism?
I wasn't arguing for either of them. I'm saying you're forced to have a framework. And
yeah, I agree. I agree. So that's a good. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think I agree personally. I agree that you need to have some sort of structure, but what I don't understand is, why do you need to have a structure that is like a rigid structure? Why do you need to come at it from a place that, okay, you have this conservative structure or you have this liberal structure? Why is that necessary? Shouldn't the structure be, let's figure out like what the most faithful adaptation of the law is?
I think that, to me, sounds like a very traditionalist approach, looking at what is I assume you'd be looking at the language directly. I think, first of all, a framework, you're going to have a framework regardless of whether you think you have one or not.
Yeah,
I think
we agree there.
Yeah, most justices come to the table with a framework that, if you look, at a history of cases, I don't think they're coming in saying, I know how I'm going to decide this case. They're going to interpret the facts of the case. They're going to take a look at, all of the precedent plus the facts of this particular case to read into, what makes most sense here, and what's a most, faithful, view of the law, and then also kind of what is the intent of the law, and that's where you see that interesting, change in interpretation. Are you someone who's going to, interpret the intent of the law to be almost more important, or is the actual words, more important? And that's where you see the splits in the Supreme Court, for example. And everybody comes from a different starting place, and I think that's impossible to, weed out. And I think, you want a little bit of a balance, and I think Ginsburg believed that, and that's why she, sometimes you'd see her shift through the years on her type and how, I guess, consistent she was with reading and interpreting the Constitution. But yeah, I don't know if people come in with a particular framework knowing how they're going to answer every, case, because that would be a little bit silly. I do think we have usually Supreme Court justices, at least in the recent, couple of decades, have been critical thinkers. They're lawyers. I remember we're judges for many, many years. So.
Well, I think pretty much since Bork, you haven't had justices that actually will say in their hearings what their opinions are. It's always this kind of dance about, anytime you get hearings for a new Supreme Court justice, about how little they're going to say. I mean, Amy Coney Barrett said several times, well, I'm just not going to tell you what I think about that because I might end up ruling on that. I mean, when she was asked several times regarding questions like abortion and things like that, or, regarding how she looks upon executive power, she pretty much said, if you knew nothing about her, you'd think she has absolutely no opinion on it.
I think it's hard for people to realize that each decision is going to be based on the facts presented, and leanings are important, obviously, but it's going to be, most of the big cases that you're aware of have limited holdings, It's something that may only apply to that particular case or maybe to certain types of cases, but it does, I mean, we look at things on a case by case basis for a reason. So I do think it is difficult for someone to say what they believe is going to be.
Yeah, I kind of like the point Alison made about the critical thinking aspect of it. I don't think when you say framework, Bruno, like conservative versus liberal, I don't think those stance should drive the judge, but the judge should drive those. Those should be more like a guide for the individual, the judge, and not so much the textbook, as to put, I guess, lack of a better word. So lots of it should come down to the critical thinking aspects, case by case, I think. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think like what you're saying is that it's kind of like what, if I understood right, it's what I'm trying to get at. It's that, yes, you do need a framework, but that doesn't mean that a justice or a law or a judge shouldn't be impartial. It just means that, yeah, your framework is how do you interpret things. And I think, like Allison, like what you said, that seems like it's a traditionalist way of going about things. You're trying to respect the laws, be as faithful as possible. It's true. I agree that you need to have that kind of type of framework. What I don't think is that you need a framework that is overtly political. In fact, I think that's harmful if you have a framework that is overtly political.
Well,
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Right, because when you think about people who make laws, they're elected on a term basis, and you can argue whether terms are good or bad, but in some sense, when we look at legislative individuals, I mean, they're going to be making political decisions. They're always worried about what their constituents are thinking and whether or not they're going to get reelected. Are they making the right political move?
Exactly. Yeah.
Justices do not have that same line of thinking because they're elected for life, and they're not worried about whether or not their decisions are going to align politically to please other people. That being said, I mean, if someone really was elected to the Supreme Court and they really find abortion so disturbing, on any level, they'd have to read the law based on precedent. But that being said, that personal bias, will that come into a decision and a vote? Quite possibly. I mean, it's hard to say that wouldn't necessarily, affect our decisions. And we like to say in the philosophy group a lot of times that like our rationale can be kind of, I don't know, fostered in a way that it might perpetuate some maybe underlying emotional, leanings, and who knows? I mean, maybe that's true, but I mean, so I understand like some concern if you have a personal belief against, a constitutional issue, could that affect your reading and interpretation of the Constitution?
Well, except that the Supreme Court has become incredibly politicized, especially the nomination process. I mean, we wouldn't have seen McConnell doing what he's done if not. I mean, obviously not allowing Merrick Garland, as far as I know of history, is unprecedented. Not even giving a hearing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that you are corrupting by doing those things. You are corrupting something that should not be corrupted.
So I would distinguish between the process of getting them elected, not nominated, and from the decision-making processes of the judges themselves. But I want to ask sincerely, does anyone believe that if the shoe were on the other foot and Democrats just lost a Ginsburg before her time, so if you switch out, gosh, I'm forgetting his name, the guy who died, Garland. Yes, Scalia.
So you mean if? Oh yeah, they would have done the same thing because McConnell had already established the precedent.
No. I'm saying if there were no precedent and you believe abortion rights are at stake, do you not want your representative to pull every trick out that they possibly can in order to maintain the status quo of abortion rights?
Do I not want them to, or do I think they will do it? Because I think they will do it.
Do you want them to?
No, I wouldn't want them to. I wouldn't want them to, because that would be setting a dangerous and stupid precedent.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I think that I understand like what you're asking. Like, if I
Yeah.
mean, I can only answer for myself. For myself, that's not really the issue. You know, I think that that's being petty. You know, like, and you're corrupting something that is, that, like as I said, should not be corrupted. The bigger issue is, how do you keep like a court that is vital for the country to work? How do you keep it working properly? I mean, I think that's a much more, more important question. That's my opinion, anyway.
I mean, kind of what I'm trying to get at is a little bit like, when you subvert norms for short-term political gain, can you imagine a political gain high enough, a threat to your policies high enough, where the threat to the norm is worthwhile?
Something that gets to the point where you don't even allow a vote to take place on something. Whether you think you're going to win that vote or lose that vote is irrelevant, but you don't even allow the vote to take place. That invests too much power in a single individual. And that's my objection to this whole thing, is that one person should not be able to hold the entire country hostage for generations, right? Just one person. Why should one person be vested with that much power?
So you're saying
one person elected by 2% of the states.
So you're saying
McConnell
norms to the death.
What's that?
Norms to the death.
I still couldn't understand you.
No, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Norms to the death.
Norms to the death. I think allowing the democratic process to be the democratic process, either that norm is followed or you quit pretending that you got a representative republic, because it isn't anymore. It has now become an autocracy. And I did not sign up to live in an autocracy.
You didn't sign up to live in
1957 when I was born.
Well, McConnell, in the speech before the final vote of Amy Coney Barrett, pretty much gave you the answer. He said elections have consequences. He said basically that his position in the Senate majority was elected, and so therefore that meant that they were empowered basically to do whatever at that point. I mean, that was McConnell's answer, was that if he's majority leader, clearly he's majority leader because a majority of senators voted for him, and in turn a majority of the states elected those senators. And at that point, he figured, well, he could do pretty much whatever he wanted.
Majority of the American people. Yeah.
I mean, the Senate could always just say, we don't like you as majority leader, or we could vote you down, but the majority of senators didn't. Now, it's weird because you're right. He's using one norm to defend another norm, to defend the breaking of several other norms. And to answer Matt's question directly, I don't think, if the shoe had been on the foot, say Schumer was majority leader now, and Amy Coney Barrett came up, I don't think Schumer would have just said, no, we're not going to. I think he would have said, we'll give her a hearing, but we might vote her down. And basically be like what happened to Bork, where there was plenty of hearings on Bork, but he was voted down.
It's interesting. So one response I think of when you talk about basically the threat to democracy, and whether you snapped your fingers and all of a sudden you're an autocracy. I tend to think it's much more like it's a spectrum on every decision, and there's kind of tipping points where it's lost sufficient legitimacy to lose its function as a governing body, and there's this worry that every one of those kinds of anti-democratic choices is going to be a domino, and it's going to just lead to the total dissolution of any sort of respectable political action. But I think that these choices are happening all the time without nearly that sort of catastrophic consequence. I mean, McConnell's choice, just as an example, I mean, say what you want about not liking how they're behaving right now, it's still functioning, right? Like we are still in there was an election, there was, there are a bunch of other democratic norms that are still carrying forth even in the face of totally undemocratic choices being made.
I'm sorry.
There's an element of resilience to the system.
It's still functioning. How many people died in the last week? Don't tell me it's still functioning. There's some very serious dysfunction going on, man.
Oh, no doubt. I didn't mean to imply that there's no harm being done from a system behaving suboptimally. What I mean is,
people dying is not what I would just call suboptimal behavior. I think one has to be a little more humanistic about this. But
it's not anarchy, right?
Well, yeah, we're not in a state of civil war. We haven't become a failed state.
Right.
I think it's kind of the frog being boiled story. It is a slow process. It's difficult to recognize, but I think, and this might be a change of subject. I'm honestly not sure, even if we had a different government, different presidency, if the response towards COVID would have been any better. I certainly say you can blame the Trump administration, but this is really a failure, I think, of all of American society for how bad we are regarding COVID.
I do wonder, and I think Minnesota, our governor, has had to make, decisions and weigh, economic, decisions. We live in a capitalist society in terms of, for example, a second lockdown. But I know for a fact that, in Minnesota, we feared losing some federal funding based on, decisions made by our government, our governor in terms of a secondary lockdown. So, I mean, there is some threat there of, could we lose federal funding for programs if we shut down the state? Plus, of course, individual economic concerns for small businesses, which, I mean, both are, we're trying to weigh certain things in terms of how we handle a crisis like this in, a state. Again, states have rights, and they're the ones making majority of these laws, right? They're not, federal government is not making laws. And I think it would be an interesting question of whether or not the federal government should be, demanding each state's lockdown in a certain way. I think that would be an interesting, I don't know if that's really what needs to happen, but I think the fact that we're afraid of losing federal funding is an additional pressure that probably doesn't really need to be there. But
I think the misinformation from the top has contributed to tens of thousands of deaths. I mean, I think that's a pretty straightforward claim. I don't know how else to put that.
Having leadership that's simply, I mean, from a federal standpoint, that might communicate a different message. I think, a lot of people would probably say might have an influence on people beyond just, regulations and executive changes. But.
Right. Yeah. Leadership certainly can, but this is, Allison, you're right, that states have a lot of say. I just look at it though, it's just a failure of society. I mean, I think COVID exposed, it's many problems that we have with our society, and in a pandemic where it requires a lot of individual action to lead to a overall societal outcome. We're just not, as a society, we're just not well prepared to deal with that.
I like to imagine if Churchill were president during this time, like I'm just imagining London bombing happening. He's out on the roof, staring out, musing, smoking a cigar. Like what that version would be in the COVID during the USA. I think that'd be a good president to have, I think.
Well, we don't need Churchill. I mean, during World War II, there were, there was rationing. There's a lot of restrictions on society. I mean, the greatest generation, it wasn't like everything was just normal on the home front. I mean, there was, all sorts of restrictions, like about how much meat you could buy, restrictions on buying metal and things like that, all sorts of shortages. So
there was a brief period where I was hopeful that COVID was going to be a rally around the flag sort of situation, where you get a big enough threat and groups will look past differences and kind of work together. But pretty quickly it became clear that it was going to be politicized, and that the threat isn't, it's too abstract in some ways.
Right.
Or
Yes.
something like that. Yeah.
I mean, we
Yeah,
have a
this
difference in
isn't-
philosophy, though. Wait, go ahead, Bruno.
Well, I was just going to say that the rhetoric from the top wasn't conducive to unifying the country. You could have had someone that made a different decision. Okay, let's make this about saving as many lives as possible, fighting the virus. Let's get together and do this together as a nation, as a society. But I mean, obviously, that was not the message that came through from the get-go. I mean, the message was the opposite. The message was those people are idiots. They're weak. This is nothing. This is like a little flu thing. If you're tough, this is not gonna. It's not gonna be a big deal. I don't even believe in this. And then, look, I mean, and then it degenerated into essentially two groups, like in everything else. One group saying that the people in the other group were a bunch of pussies, and the other ones were saying that those people didn't have a clue, they weren't listening to science. And it's just a very silly thing, really. It's like a playground fight. And like Sashir said, it exposes, a bunch of like fundamental flaws in society. I mean, when you look at the Asians, man, I mean, the Asians, that was the epicenter of the virus. China, Korea, Japan. How many cases are there in Japan right now, or like in total? I mean, look, be careful, use masks, use proper hygiene, listen to what the doctors are saying. And, that's the way you deal with the situation. I mean, it's not rocket science, really. I mean,
Right,
you don't
but this-
be super intelligent to understand what not to do.
Yeah, I don't think Americans could live the way that the Japanese have culturally lived for generations. That just is not the American DNA, unfortunately.
Oh no,
Fortunately, as the case may be.
Trade-offs.
And, there's a lot of great things about the United States. There's a lot of great things about the West. But yeah, I mean, at some point, look, listen to what the experts are saying. That's not going to harm you. In this case, it's going to save your life. That's probably not a bad lesson to learn, right? I mean, listen to the people that know more than you. I'm saying maybe that's a good lesson to learn. That's something we can
But
take out of this.
even, I mean, in this case, even with individuals, listening to those who maybe know more than you, and of course there's a subset that kind of rely on their own principles, and that's kind of, I think, a topic for another discussion, because that's interesting in the United States as well. But there is a philosophy in the United States that, you're an individual, and, you have your individual kind of freedom to choose, and that there's a concept of, and this is, becomes difficult in a case like this, of self-responsibility. And when you look at, that's become really a huge part of the divide when it comes down to, why we're what we're seeing in terms of personality differences, whether you believe that your actions affect other people and you're responsible for your actions, and other people are responsible for their actions because it affects large groups, or it is a risk that you take. And you hear these people who who believe in radical kind of responsibility, that it's your choice to go out in the world, and if there's risks no matter where you go, and this virus is a known risk, and if you choose to go out in the world, you're going to risk getting that virus, and I don't have a responsibility to protect you from all the risks in the world, and this is just now another known risk. And I think that's what is a belief set that we're seeing, that's kind of a real belief set, and it's also happens to be a political belief set, because we're seeing a difference politically from responsibility aspect at the end of the day. That's at least what I'm seeing in terms of personality differences in the left and the right.
when people are getting COVID, for the most part, you're either making very stupid decisions for some reason, or you're exposed to people that are making very stupid decisions. It comes down to that, you know. And if you go to, you know, whenever I go to Wisconsin, I see lots of people getting together, you know, like paying no attention to whatever is happening right now. And yes, of course, some people are going to die. You know, some people are going to unintentionally kill members of their own families. If you don't pay attention to what's going on, and if you don't follow the recommendations of the doctors, I mean, there's really no other possible outcome right now. I mean, I don't know if I should be saying this on a live stream, but since no one probably watches this at this point, you know, right now, like I live in a very small building. We have a COVID outbreak right now in my building, which is very serious. So like we're quarantining inside the apartment. It's basically because someone in the building, we have a very small building, they went to a party. They got COVID, and now maybe people in our building are going to get COVID, you know? Stupid decision. And then you're exposed to other people that make stupid decisions. Hopefully we in this apartment, we're not going to get it. But
No,
I mean, there's a possibility, you know, because we have a small building. And it's just like people should not be going to freaking parties, Halloween parties at this point, and be close to each
Now
other.
that it's mid-November, people should definitely not be going to Halloween parties.
Yeah, you
there's
shouldn't
still
be
many
going
reasons.
to,
Where you can, I'm
going to
holding a Halloween
parties with
party
a bunch
this
of
week.
people. You shouldn't be going to parties with a bunch of people without wearing masks.
So I agree with you generally that probably the majority of people who get COVID are at some level irresponsible, or like
Or they're exposed to people that are irresponsible. You have the
right. That's I was gonna say, I was thinking of grocery stores. Like I can't tell you how many times I'll be trying to keep my distance, follow the arrows, and there's just people who don't care, and it's just like, well,
you try to keep your distance, and there's someone who, you know, breathes on you, and it's like, I mean, come on.
I think in Minnesota, they said that 70% of the cases are things like weddings, parties, indoor type of events. That's 70% of the cases are those types of events, which is probably not surprising to us. I think, like in terms of the CDC, going and shopping at a grocery store, even taking public transportation is considered low risk.
That you're sharing.
Well, there are certain risks. Yeah, obviously, at a place that the most risk is being indoors with little ventilation and masked. I mean, that's clearly the most risk. And then you kind of you kind of take factors out. So if you're outside, you know, and you have more ventilation, it's less risk. But that said, if you have a big crowd outside, then it's more risk if you have fewer people. I mean, there's no real. I mean, it's just the nature of disease. It's a highly communicable disease. We do everything right, but because we can't absolutely hermetically seal ourselves off, there's always going to get that. It's always just a matter of how much do you reduce your risk by what.
Do you think that post-COVID we're going to become a hugging society? Just you know, like I kind of hope we do, because I'm part Lebanese, and I have family who they're just so touchy-feely and so warm and so gregarious, and it just feels so anyway, I hope that there's a positive touchy-feeliness that comes out of the COVID survival.
My wife is half Lebanese, and I'm sure she would agree with you on that front. Absolutely. It does seem part of that culture as much as it is, say, not in the Scandinavian culture or the Germanic culture to some degree.
I was going to say, I'm hoping to rely a little bit on the fact that people will think hugging is a little bit awkward, and I will play hard into that. Like, oh, yes, I forgot how to hug, but really I'm just communicating that I never really knew how to hug, and now I'm like learning how to do it for the first time. So.
Okay, so Allison's not hugging people. We got that.
I've seen no change in terms of, you know, hugging people in my efforts.
Yeah.
Me either, although I have to admit I will almost always stop and hug a dog given the opportunity, especially lately. But I don't know what that says about me, but
I know
I
I've
miss my
friends are
dogs.
huggers.
Let's talk about it, Craig.
I guess it says I miss my dogs.
Yeah.
I think we're all going to be a little bit traumatized for a while. I don't know how long, but I think this is going to make us
63 years and counting, buddy.
all over the world. People are going to touch less and spend less time really close to other people, I think.
I don't know about that. I think we're going to see, as soon as this, it's going to be a mixed bag, but I think there's going to be people who are going to go around hugging everybody.
Would you describe this as a trauma? And I don't mean that in a I don't read the tone as like dismissive, but would you describe this experience as traumatic?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can tell you that because I'm trying to work a full-time job and take basically full-time classes at the university at the same time. And what I find is trying to get the concentration and the wherewithal to write has just completely gone away since this is, so I have a complete bitch of a time trying to write a paper, and it's even a short paper for it. So yes, I think I am in fact dealing with some kind of a PTSD-like phenomenon.
So
Yeah, I think there's definitely a trauma component for society at large. I think it's obviously going to depend on the person a lot. I mean, for some people are losing family members. Some people are losing, children, parents, grandparents. For those people, it's a lot harder than for someone who doesn't lose anybody. Some people are getting COVID and recovering, but maybe spending a couple of weeks at the hospital. That's a trauma because you don't know if you're going to make it, if you're going to get it out, if you're going to get out.
Some people have large families and they can't support them right now, and
exactly.
other people are living alone. I mean, there are people who are isolated who really, people who are older and they don't have, children in the area and they live by themselves and they've been isolated since, March and April. And
yeah, my mother-in-law, she's been alone for months now, and with the winter now, it's a little bit worrisome for some people that live alone, and they're going to go through 4 months now without having contact with people.
And I think there's some people who just don't have online contact too, and we're not really, considering that. I remember taking a walk in April, and I was living with someone at the time, but we were taking a walk and, seeing elderly people in the neighborhood who were like waving desperately just to have some sort of like interaction with someone on the street. And you could see, it was painful for them, in some sense. And I think we're resilient as human beings, but, I had some friends take a personality test and I personally saw, dips in my sociability after, a matter of months from taking it at the beginning, like near the April, March timeframe, to the end of May and June. I saw, for me personally, personality changes, and I think if that's happening for me, I would consider myself relatively resilient. And I imagine for people, especially people who are like very touchy-feely, who are like very like extroverted, and they're stuck in home indoors and they're afraid to go out. I think you're seeing some huge mental illnesses there.
And in Minnesota, we can mostly get out of the house. That's going to change with the winter.
Right.
But so we're going to, in places in Europe, people have been inside the house for, couple times. This is the second lockdown. First lockdown was 1 month, 2 months that people could not leave the apartment. For someone that lives alone, that's scary, but it's also very lonely.
I was thinking of investing in those. I think we talked about this before, Allison, like the outdoor heating.
Those like units, yeah.
Right, yeah. I think Brianna
like
has
a
one.
couple of them, because she has one, and it's like, okay, I want to buy like 3 and put them all in Brianna's place, and it'd be like a default philosophy hangout spot. And Brianna told me I could say that.
You can't put them in my bag.
It's going to be tough, Minnesota in the winter during COVID. It's going to be
Although
I still might be down for building an igloo.
Those heaters are good.
Powerful.
Yeah.
No, I'm not sure we could social distance inside the igloo. It might just be a one-person igloo. So sorry. You guys can help me build it, but you can't command.
Personal yurts, man, that's what we need, our personal yurts.
Isn't that kind of what we're doing right now? This is our personal yurt space.
Kinda, sorta.
Yeah, it's even, you even have the squares. You can just imagine it in a dome.
Yeah.
We'll stick our faces out. Wave.
I think, yeah, this
You can burn some horse dung to really get that yurt.
Yeah, there we go.
I think having virtual contact is a big thing. At least we have this. Like, I think that's a good point, Ellison. You know, some people don't have this. You know, some
Seeing
people are going
facial
through.
expressions and things like that is really important to
Yeah.
us socially.
I really like, I'm on Zoom a fucking lot, and I like, it's really hard for me, even though I'm a very social person. I'm extroverted. I like talking, and it's rare when at the end of a work day I'm like, you know what sounds good? Getting on a screen to talk to people. Like, it's just
There is something different about, I don't know if you guys, like, I forgot what it was, but it was like the first time that I remember meeting up with people after we had been under lockdown, probably for several months, and like getting together with a group, socially distancing. And I was just blown away by how different it felt to be in, you know, human beings' presence. Like, this is good, but like, it just struck me as being such a different experience. And me, I had always thought, you know, if we went virtual, like, I would be fine. Like, I always thought that, to be honest, because I spent so much time on my phone, so much time on the internet. Like, I could just keep up these long, you know, relationships over the web so easily that I was like, I can do this forever. I don't really need people. And it just struck me as a totally different experience being live. And I think, like, I will appreciate the holidays more than I ever will going, you know, forward. You know, I kind of took Thanksgiving as like, oh, who cares? Like, I'll skip it this year, or like, oh yeah, my family, whatever, sharing mashed potatoes and the green beans, and I'll do the, you know, whatever. But I think there's going to be something really cathartic about being together, sharing foods with one another. It's like such a human, it's like what we were made to do, right?
totally. And so there's a few different organizations in the bridging movement that specifically design their programs around what you just said. It's sharing meals together across political differences. And there's something about sharing a meal that builds immediate trust, because it means we're eating the same food source, and it means that you and I are together building resources. We're together doing a project of putting it together at dinner. It's all simple and seemingly like, you know, even racists can make a killer guacamole. So what?
It's breaking bread. That's the ancient concept of.
Yeah,
Breaking bread.
that's right.
Actually, I have another reading recommendation since we've been talking about this. And Craig might like this, is the Asimov novel, The Naked Sun, about Solaria. So it's basically set in this, it's like it's when humans have colonized a galaxy, but one planet has, where they've become extreme isolationists in terms of that there's only like 1,000 people who live on the world.
Mhm.
They try to avoid any sort of actual contact, but they still interact with each other through what they call tridimensional viewing, through holographic viewing, but they can't, like, the actual physical presence of being with somebody, you know, is enough to drive some of them insane to be in the same room with somebody.
I also, this is probably just a long comment on a Facebook post, but it was describing how I wanted to make it sound more credible than that, but it's not. It's basically, it takes our brains a lot more energy to process people's facial expressions using a screen because of the lag time. And so the minimal lag between expressions, it's our brain is constantly trying to stay in sync with people, and it's a lot more taxing to even doing this as compared to.
I think even, it's funny, more than just even facial cues and things like that. I think there's a presence, like you can feel almost whether someone's tense near you, or if they're kind of paying attention, or where people are looking. It's like you can't tell who's looking at whom, you know, everybody's just kind of like staring straight ahead.
Mhm.
But I mean, yeah,
I'm looking-
all these
I'm
little
Who's
looking at
scrolling Reddit right now?
I'm looking at you. Don't worry.
As he bobs his head, I'm looking at you.
I might be looking at something else and telling you that I'm looking at. No, I'm
All
actually. I've been only
I
looking
think
at you
that's-
guys since this started.
You can tell when their eyes start doing this that they're reading something.
Exactly. I have.
I'm looking at the last 8 minutes of the
Hold on a
space
second.
countdown,
Yeah,
too. So
I'm
What-
totally paying attention to what you're saying. Actually, this was funny. I was just talking to a friend of mine about this right before this call and about how we've been on Zoom meetings. But hold on, I'm going to move my screen. Oops, my screen doesn't want to move. There we go. Okay, I've moved my screen to the upper screen right now, and so it's during the AIA, the American Institutes of Architects convention. So because we did it all virtually, and so I basically did this, and I was like this, looking at my other screen, because during some of the talks were very boring. They talk about insulation value. And I remember there was one where we switched to seminar, and so then I got busted because, so I'm trying to talk on the seminar like this, looking up. People were like, why do you look so weird? Like, are you looking at a different screen?
I heard that there's there's a software that will make it so that your gaze meets your, like, looks like you're looking into the camera. Right. So if I'm staring directly into the camera, it looks like I'm talking directly to you now, even though now I can't actually look at your face. There's software where
it's a
gently
lot
adjust
better
it.
when people look at the camera because it's like they're looking at you. But at the same time, I can't look at the camera and look at you guys at the same time. So it's confusing. I think for me, it's just better to not look at the camera, but I'm actually talking to you and seeing your faces. Then if I'm looking at the camera, it's just weird.
Yeah. Of course, we could just do this. No.
I mean, that's true.
Then you got no idea what I'm doing. What I'm looking at.
I have an exam coming up that's online, and what they do is they have an eye tracker so that you can't cheat and look off, to the side or look down to, look at your notes. But I wonder, you think about the software where, you can trick it. And I think I've heard about this, and I don't know, I haven't read too much into it, but how somebody had glasses that were able to fool the device into thinking it was, you're looking straight at the screen, but really, I mean, you're looking all over the place. And I mean, even the bar exam for the California bar exam, I wonder how, what software they're using. I'm curious because I know that that's online this year. And, that's an interesting thing too, in February. So, I mean, I'm sure
you're curious for a friend, Allison?
What?
You're curious for a friend, Allison?
Curious for a friend. But I mean, the thing is, if you were to try that and risk it, I mean, because what they do is they record you too. So like in that case, the person got busted because there was something that, set off a red flag, and then they had a human being reviewing and seeing the glasses. And at that point, I mean, you're never going to pass
like
that
this.
test again, right? Good luck becoming an attorney.
This is kind of the World Series of Poker. You guys wearing the shades.
Yeah.
So you can't tell what they're looking at in their cards. Or you get some guys who pull the hood up while they're playing poker.
Well, this was fun, guys. I'm gonna head out.
Well, yeah, I think it's a good time. This went a lot longer than.
Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't jump in earlier.
No, it's fine. But yeah, thanks a lot for joining, guys, and for participating. This was a fun discussion.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Nice
you
to
very
see
much.
everyone.
Yep, thanks for hosting.
And later on today, I'm actually gonna do another one, but it's gonna be like a movie watching thing. We're gonna watch Snowden and then talk about it. Have you guys seen that movie?
Mhm.
Nope, not yet.
So that one I'm excited about.
All right, we'll have
All
to
right,
see it.
I did see the new Borat movie last week.
All right, bye, everyone.
See that?
Good night.
Bye, Allison. Thank you. Yeah, that's a cool movie, Secure, the Borat movie. Anyways, we could talk about it, I guess, next time. So it was really nice talking to you guys. Thank you so much, guys.